Hey gang, this is Mrs. Klein.
Hi, this is Miss Burkles, and we are in Lesson 3 on page 41, The Legacy of the Roman Empire. This lesson's guiding question is, to what extent have the contributions of ancient Rome influenced modern society?
So this is an opportunity, this lesson, you guys, is an opportunity for us to say, hey, you know what? Hundreds of years ago, things happened in Rome that still have an impact on our world today. So we get to make that connection between medieval times and our time. All right, there's some vocabulary words that go along with this lesson, and they are aqueduct, corruption, decline, empire, mosaic, philosophy, proverb, Roman Empire, and scribe.
So, starting with the introduction. At its height, around 200 CE, the Roman Empire spanned the whole of the Mediterranean world from northern Africa to the Scottish border, from Spain to Syria. But the empire did not last. By the year 500 CE, the western half of this great empire had collapsed.
And remember, the last lesson we learned about what happened in the Byzantine Empire, that's the eastern half. What was happening in the western half of the empire, that's what we're going to learn about now, but it did not involve what was happening in the eastern half of the Roman Empire. Okay, all right. As one historian wrote, Rome perished, yet it lived on. The medieval world would pass on many aspects of Roman culture that still affect us today. In this lesson, you will discover how and why the Roman Empire fell. Then you're going to learn how Rome's influence continues to live on in so many ways today, in art, architecture, and engineering, language and writing, and philosophy, law, and citizenship.
Section 1, The End of the Roman Empire in the West. Problems in the late empire. There was no single reason for the end of the Roman Empire. Instead, historians point to a number of problems that combined to bring about its fall. One of these was political instability. Rome never solved the problem of how to peacefully transfer political power to a new leader.
So then they probably fought a whole heck of a lot when they
Right.
didn't have that system in place. All right, next up, economic and social problems. Besides political instability, the empire suffered from economic and social problems. To finance Rome's huge armies, its citizens had to pay heavy taxes. These taxes weakened the economy and drove many people into poverty, and trade also suffered.
Other social problems plagued the empire, including growing corruption and a decline in the spirit of citizenship. A final problem was the weakening of the empire's frontiers. The huge size of the empire made it hard to defend, and it sometimes took weeks for leaders in Rome to communicate with generals.
Yeah, think about it, how good we have it nowadays. I got a computer in my back pocket and I can talk to somebody on the other side of the world like instantaneously. That did not happen back in medieval times. All right, the fall of Rome. In 330 CE, the Emperor Constantine took a step that changed the future of the Roman Empire. He moved his capital 850 miles east to the ancient city of Byzantium. Later, it was called Constantinople. The vast empire was usually ruled by two emperors, one based in Rome and one based in Constantinople.
The emperors in Rome soon found themselves threatened by invading Germanic tribes. The western half of the empire began to dissolve into separate kingdoms. But Rome's fall did not mean the end of Roman civilization. The influence of Rome lived on through the medieval period and all the way to our time.
All right, let's talk about the legacy of Roman art. The Romans were especially influenced by the art of the Greeks. The Romans added their own talents and tastes to what they learned from other cultures. Romans were also great patrons or sponsors of art. Wealthy families decorated their homes with statues and colorful murals and mosaics.
About 1,000 years after the fall of the empire, during the period called the Renaissance, Roman art was rediscovered. Today, you can see a number of statues in Washington, D.C. that reflect a strong Roman influence.
All right, next up is the legacy of Roman architecture and engineering. The Romans were skilled and clever builders. In their architecture and engineering, they borrowed ideas from the Greeks and others and other peoples.
The Romans learned how to use the arch, the vault, and the dome to build huge structures. The Romans used concrete to help them build much bigger arches than anyone had attempted before.
The Romans also invented a new kind of stadium, large open air structures that could seat thousands of spectators. Modern football stadiums still use this feature.
You can also see a Roman influence in the design of many modern churches, banks, and government buildings. A fine example is the Capitol Building, the home of the U.S. Congress in Washington, D.C.
All right, next up is engineering. They were the greatest builders of roads, bridges, and aqueducts in the ancient world. More than 50,000 miles of road connected Rome with the frontiers of the empire. Their techniques set the standard of road building for 2,000 years.
The Romans also set a new standard for building aqueducts. They created a system of aqueducts for Rome that brought water from about 60 miles away to the homes of the city's wealthiest citizens, as well as to its public baths and fountains.
All right, next up is the legacy of the Roman language and writing. An especially important legacy of Rome for people in medieval times was the Romans' language, Latin. After Latin continued to be used by scholars and the Roman Catholic Church. Educated European nobles learned Latin so they could communicate with their peers in other countries.
Latin remains extremely influential. Several modern European languages developed from Latin, including Italian, Spanish, and French. In fact, we still use the Latin alphabet, although Latin has 23 letters and English has 26.
All right, you can see the influence of Latin in many of the words we use today. The names of several months come from Latin. August honors a Caesar Augustus, and September comes from the Latin word meaning the seventh month. And especially if you guys had Mrs. Hayes last year as your core teacher, you guys know all about Latin and Greek roots and prefixes because you totally did work with her on those. Many English words start with Latin prefixes.
Other English words come from Latin root words. Even Latin proverbs are still in use. For example, if you look at the reverse side of a U.S. penny, you'll see the U.S. motto, E pluribus unum, which means out of many, one. Finally, we still use Roman numerals, which is a system that uses letters to write numbers.
All right. Next up is the legacy of Roman philosophy, law, and citizenship. Roman philosophy, law, and ideas about citizenship were greatly influenced by the Greeks. A Greek school of thought that was especially popular in Rome was Stoicism. To the Stoics, the one truly good thing in life was to have good character, which meant having virtues such as self-control and courage.
Roman law covered marriages, inheritances, and contracts or agreements between people, as well as countless other areas of daily life. Another legacy of the Romans was the Roman idea of justice. The Romans believed that there was a universal law of justice that came from nature, and that by this natural law, every person had rights.
All right, moving on to citizenship. When Rome first began expanding its power in Italy, to be a Roman was to be a citizen of the city-state of Rome. Over time, however, Rome's leaders gradually extended citizenship to all free people in the empire.
The idea of citizenship as both a privilege and a responsibility has descended from Roman times to our own. Regardless of where they were born, all citizens have the same responsibilities and all enjoy the same basic rights spelled out in the Constitution.
Okay, all right, here's our lesson summary, you guys. So in this lesson, we explored the rich legacy of ancient Rome. The Roman Empire fell more than 1,500 years ago, but it left a lasting influence throughout Western culture that you experience nearly every single day.
One of those is art, architecture, and engineering. Artists still follow Roman styles in sculpture, mosaics, glass, and other art forms. Roman influences are seen in the arches, domes, and vaults of many modern churches, banks, and government buildings. The Romans also were talented engineers whose construction methods and standards lasted thousands of years.
All right, language and writing. Many words and word parts in modern languages, including English, French, and Spanish, developed from the Roman language, Latin. Roman numerals appear today on clocks, in books, and in TV and movie credits.
Philosophy, law, and citizenship. Roman ideals such as the philosophy of Stoicism, rule of law, and justice shaped the law codes and government structures of many nations today. Examples of the continuing influence of Roman ideas include today's law courts, written law such as the U.S. Constitution, and our representative government.
All right, so let's just do a little bit of a reminder, you guys. So this lesson was all about the legacy of the Roman Empire. That guiding question is, to what extent have the contributions of ancient Rome influenced modern society? The cool part about this lesson, you guys, is you get to use this in working on your performance assessment that has to do about the legacy of the Roman Empire. So like any bit of information you need to include in your performance assessment, you can find right here in lesson 3. Don't forget about those vocabulary terms that'll be on a podcast quiz.
Aqueduct, corruption, decline, empire, mosaic, philosophy, proverb, Roman Empire, and scribe.
All right, hasta luego.
See you later.